Welcome to Feminist Question Time, brought to you by Women's Declaration International, the leading global organization defending women's sex-based rights against the threats posed by gender identity ideology. Many of us have been active feminists since the 1970s or before, so we were not surprised when this new attack on women came along, and we have not changed our analysis. In 2018, we wrote a declaration on women's sex-based rights, which lays out our position. It's been signed by nearly 40,000 people from 160 countries and is supported by 547 organizations. To promote the declaration and the sex-based rights for women, we have volunteer activists, including country contacts from every continent. Please join us. You can also become a member of WDI to help our work by volunteering or donating. You can email info@womensdeclaration.com or find your country contact on the website at womensdeclaration.com. This Zoom is a women-only webinar. We ask men to watch later on YouTube, and we have subtitles. If you'd like subtitles in English, press the subtitle button and you can make them small, medium, or large. Today, we'll be talking about TERFLandia, how the global Terven will win the gender wars. TERFLandia is likely to be a book to be published in the fall of 2026. The Australian feminist publisher Spinifex has expressed interest in publishing it. Its inspiration was an exchange between myself and Julia Long during a Feminist Question Time breakout session a while ago. Julia and I were talking about the importance of documenting all the hard work women have been doing all over the world for a very long time to protect our sex-based rights. And now I think we'll have a video explaining and summarizing the book. Hello, I'm Kara Dansky, and I'm thrilled to announce this project. The inspiration for this project was a conversation I once had with Julia Long during a breakout session following Feminist Question Time, which is a weekly webinar hosted by the group Women's Declaration International. Julia and I were discussing the importance of documenting the important work done by women all over the world to push back on trans or gender identity. When discussing this topic, a lot of people, especially conservative men, like to say, "Where are the feminists?" Well, welcome to TERFLandia.
My name's Julia Long, and together with Sally Wainwright, I have the pleasure of writing the chapter on TERF Island itself, the UK. The movement here in the UK has been phenomenal. The battle has been fought on so many fronts, and there have been so many truly remarkable achievements. Between us, we'll be documenting the milestones and victories in what has been very much a collective struggle by women here in the UK. We're delighted to be contributing to the book, and we're very grateful to Kara Dansky for documenting this global struggle for women's rights.
I'm Amy Ham. Canada is known as a holdout for gender insanity. We have some of the world's most outrageous and government-funded trans activists. What's less known about Canada is that we have a long history of TERFism. There are hundreds of Canadian women who are fighting to regain our sex-based rights, and we're often severely punished for doing so, but we do it anyways. I'm really excited to be able to share Canada's story with you.
This is Róisín. I'm going to write the chapter about Europe, which is no small task considering that there are 26 countries in the EU and more than 40 in Europe proper. I'm going to write about how even though it was super top-down and inorganic how trans ideology was imposed on us independently all over Europe in our different countries, different languages, women stood up and said no. And I would like to focus on this contrast between the inorganic imposition and all the independent women who just stood up all over the continent independently of each other and began to fight against it.
Hi, my name's Angie Jones and I'm from Australia, and I'm really honoured to be involved with the TERFLandia project. I came relatively late to the TERF movement and I started speaking up about it in about 2017. And a lot has happened since then, but I have since also found out that a lot had happened before then, that there have been women fighting the intrusion of men into women's spaces in Australia for decades. So I'm really looking forward to delving into our history a little bit further for all of you. Thank you.
Hello, Jan Rivers here. I'll be writing the New Zealand chapter of TERFLandia. It'll cover a range of feisty, local gender-critical organisations. On one hand, you'll read about a sports sector that's starting to win the argument, and about public institutions that are embarrassing themselves in their commitment to gender theory, to public radio so partisan its listenership has fallen below that of 8 other commercial stations, and a midwifery sector at war with itself. Finally, there'll be some information on the aftermath of Posey Parker's 2023 visit to New Zealand.
Hi, my name is Vaishnavi. I'm a feminist filmmaker and a writer, and it is an honor to highlight the powerful resistance of women across East and South Asian countries against the trans ideology. In our societies where misogyny runs deep and shapes women's daily realities, this ideology finds fertile ground to thrive. By documenting and amplifying Asian women's voices, I aim to put our countries firmly on the map in the global conversation on safeguarding women's rights and protecting the hard-won spaces vital for our sex-based liberation.
Hello, TERFies. This is Maria Binetti from Argentina, and along with Analía Vitale, we will write in the chapter devoted to Latin America, the most unequal continent in the world and the most violent for women and girls.
Latin America has been a pioneer in colonization by United Nations lobbies, other philanthropic organizations, political parties, and leftist intellectuals who have driven social re-engineering to erase women and commodify their bodies.
I am Peja Blackbird. I am one of millions of women who fights back every day online. We connect with our sisters that are on the ground. We connect with each other in every country. We know more about each other's countries, politics, and culture than most people who go for a master's degree in geopolitics. We are the backbone, we are the lifeblood, we are the heartbeat of this movement. We stand strong with our sisters who are out there, boots on the ground, and we know they need us watching as an eye in the sky for every event where women shout, adult human female.
Thanks so much for your interest in this project. We're all thrilled to celebrate all the women who have been fighting for our sex-based rights for all of these years. I am so happy to be here today with some of the women you just heard from. Thank you so much to Vaishnavi Sundar for everything you do for the movement, and in particular for that video. So I reached out to all of these amazing women to write chapters contributing from their countries and in some cases regions. So our speakers today are myself. I'll be talking about the preface to the book, which I've drafted, and a chapter on the American TERFs. The other contributors who are with us today are Sally Wainwright and Julia Long from TERF Island, Róisín Michaux from Europe, Maria Binetti and Analía Vitale from Latin America, and hopefully Amy Ham will be joining us from Canada. I have to note the several other book contributors who could not be here with us today. They are, as you now know, Angie Jones on Australia, Jan Rivers on New Zealand, Vaishnavi Sundar on East and South Asia, and Peja Blackbird on the global army of online TERFs. And a woman who wishes to remain anonymous has generously contributed to the project by giving contributing authors a modest advance. Thanks so much to her for her support. I've drafted the preface and the chapter on the American TERFs. I'm just going to read the first few paragraphs of the preface, and then I'll hand it off to Sally and Julia to talk about TERF Island, and then we'll go from there. Here's how the draft preface begins. Beginning in the mid-2010s and gaining steam thereafter, a massive debate began raging about what a woman is, whether or not sex is real, and if it is, whether it matters less than people's claimed gender identities. This debate has been raging globally. It has been raging loudly for those of us in the middle of it, but much more quietly for the multitudes who still don't quite understand it. As explained in the chapters that follow, this debate started much earlier than the mid-2010s, but it didn't really start to rage until that time. These are the gender wars, or if you like, trans. Trans, or gender identity, is the state of claiming to be the opposite sex, a member of no sex, or a member of a third sex class that doesn't exist. The authors of these chapters reject it completely. We are women, after all, meaning that we are adult human beings of the female sex class. No men are women. And yet, somehow, society seems to have been persuaded that some men are women if they say so, if they adorn the stereotypes of femininity, and or if they have surgeries or take hormones to make themselves try to resemble women. We're still living in this reality, though things are changing. There are still plenty of people who insist that some men are women and that some women are men. All of this is grounded in the idea that sex is either not real or changeable, neither of which is true. In 1979, a lesbian radical feminist named Janice Raymond published a book titled The Transsexual Empire: The Making of the She-Male. She's made it free and publicly available via a downloadable PDF. She dedicated the book to Mary Daly, another radical feminist author who insisted on preserving the category of womanhood for women, i.e., adult human female people. Daly died in 2010, but her work still serves as an inspiration for women just waking up to the reality of what it means to be female in a society that is extremely hostile to women and girls as a sex class. The draft preface goes on to talk about the silencing of our voices in the media and the violence women face when we talk about these things. It ends with this footnote. A few disclaimers are in order. First, it is not possible to name every single woman who has been active in this fight. There are simply too many of us, and these chapters will necessarily leave some women out. Sincere apologies to those who have been omitted, but who deserve mention. Second, the Terven don't all like each other. These chapters will include women who have had some serious disagreements over the years. The aim here is not to claim that the Terven are all one big happy family, nor is it to air dirty laundry. The aim instead is to make a record of as many women as possible who lent their voices to a movement that absolutely none of them ever wanted to have to join. The movement to affirm that women and girls exist as a sex class and to protect children from harmful hormones and surgeries. Third, by the time the gender wars are won, a lot of people will claim that they were TERFs all along. It's not true. Myriad women threw their sisters under the bus at the altar of trans. They're going to claim membership in the global Terven once it's cool to do so. They'll be lying. Finally, this book is about women. Along the way, many men, mostly gay men, but plenty of straight men too, lent their voices to the movement. They are very much appreciated, but this book is not about them. This book is by and about women. With that, I will hand it over to Sally and Julia.
Thank you, Cara. Well, for a small island as the UK is, there's been an awful lot happening here over the last few years, and we're really struggling a bit to work out how to best tell the story of what's happened in just one very short chapter. But I rather suspect, given the broad geographic area all the authors are having to cover, that we're all going to be in a bit of the same boat. So what we're aiming to do in the TERF Island chapter is to look a little bit at some of the individuals, some of the campaigns, some of the legal cases that have taken place and that have, as far as possible, been milestones that have moved the story forwards, because a lot of women, there's so many women, for example, who've taken legal cases which are really interesting, but aren't necessarily making a new legal point. So in that example, we would be trying to look at the ones where the law has been clarified in some way or another. Of course, because I'm writing the chapter, there's always going to be something on lesbians, but also because in this context, I think it's really important. Lesbians have been facing the impact of gender identity ideology for a very, very long time. We've been fighting the incursion of men claiming to be lesbians, in inverted commas, claiming to be lesbians since certainly the 1980s. I think before the sort of bigger, more generic movements sprung up and other women became aware of it. So I think that's an important part of the story. And the other, another group that we're very keen to mention, it kind of relates back to what PJ Blackbird was saying about the women online who are mostly anonymous, is the enormous army of anonymous women that have been involved in the campaign in the UK. I think actually, to be fair, around the whole world. And the truth of the matter is that no matter how successful the big campaigns, the names that we've all heard of, none of that would have been possible without the hundreds of thousands of women, writing to their MPs, handing out leaflets on street corners, tweeting, whatever it is that they've been doing. So many women have made a really important contribution, which is, I think, absolutely the backbone of what's helped us to make some progress here in the UK. So on the legal cases, I mean, a lot of you will be familiar with, for example, and probably a lot of the readers as well, with the big legal cases like, for Women's Scotland, that define the meaning of sex as biological, Maya Forstater's case, which said that it's worthy of respect in a democratic society to hold the view that it's impossible to change sex, and Kira Bell's case about puberty blockers. And of course, that's a story that's running currently again as the UK government's trying to start up a new, or the NHS is trying to start a new puberty blocker trial in the UK almost as we speak. So we'll also try to include some of the less well-known cases as well, such as Rachel Mead, who was really important because that was the first time that a regulatory body was brought into the legal frame. So she sued not just Westminster Council, which was her employer, but also her governing body, the Social Work England, which had also sanctioned her for tweeting gender critical remarks. And Alison Bailey, you'll all be familiar with the big case of Alison Bailey with the taking her chambers to court, but maybe not so many of you also know that she took quite recently, actually, just a few months ago, took a case against her veterinary surgery because she discovered that she had been deregistered when she took her pet along to get it treated at the vets. She discovered they deregistered her because somebody didn't like her gender critical views, and she took them to court and she won. And that's really, really important because it's the first time that the whole principle of For Women in Scotland has been applied in the provision of goods and services. So the other group that we're going to look at, hopefully, is children. And I'm going to hand over to Julia and ask her to speak about that.
Okay, thanks, Sally. Yeah, before I speak about children, I just wanted to kind of echo a bit of what you were saying there, Sally, in terms of the challenge of I mean, it's a great challenge to have, the fact that there's just been such a huge amount of activity and resistance going on here over really, many years now, and to try and sort of capture as much as possible of that. Obviously, the brief is to document the women who've been involved and document the achievements. At the same time, obviously, you want to
write something that's going to be engaging and readable, and not just because you could just literally do a list of a list of, you know, all the different names, all the different groups, all the different activities, and still not cover all of it. So I think that has been a challenge. It'd be interesting to hear what the other authors have to say about that. That's certainly been something I've found really challenging, to try and document as much as possible, but still make it readable and engaging. And probably everyone here knows there is this, you can't see it very well there, the TERF Island book by Fiona McAnena. And the way that she's set that book up, structured that book, is to center it around 4 very key women and their associated campaigns and actions. And that book's I think it's about 250 odd pages. And obviously she's had to be very selective even in that. So it's really is very challenging for us. So I think we've taken an approach to cover as much ground as we can, but also just to acknowledge there's no way we can name every single woman involved, or even, you know, evaluate the impact of so many different women when so many women actually are anonymous, and it's impossible to know everyone's names. So I think we've tried to select indicative, illustrative examples that help to tell the story whilst capturing, as I say, as much of that collective struggle as we can. So yeah, so some of the bits that I was writing, I know Cara was very clear that this is important, was a bit about the early years. We're starting kind of really from the Gender Recognition Act in 2004, particularly around about 2012, with the first of the radical feminist conferences that were absolutely besieged by the trans activists. I think a lot of women aren't aware in this country of just how early that started, with, you know, venues pulling out and all of that kind of thing. But yeah, to say a bit, because obviously it's very, very topical at the moment. The section on children is particularly topical because we have the horror of this so-called clinical trial of the effect of puberty blockers on a cohort of young people. And I mean, this was all you know, set out in the Cass review. So I think in some cases there was so much gratitude for the ways in which the Cass review was very critical of what had been going on. And I think everyone felt that was a huge victory on our side, that because the practices at the Tavistock, you know, Gender Identity Development Service were exposed as being, you know, well, very unethical, and you know, a case of ideology usurping appropriate, responsible clinical practice. So I think, you know, there was so much there was such a sense of achievement that was finally being recognized. But obviously it was always there that you know, what Cass had proposed was this clinical trial, and that is all now proposed to be sort of getting underway, I think early in the new year, and there's going to be a lot of pushback against that. So it just makes the section on children, I think, particularly pertinent. So clearly probably the most well-known group here is Transgender Trend, who were there very much in those early years. They've just celebrated their 10-year anniversary, which I think is just extremely impressive, and the amount of work, you know, of the amount that they've achieved, and the output in terms of all their publications, their beautiful books for children authored by Rachel Rooney, these really delightful books that act as such an important alternative to the plethora of all the pro-trans books that are aimed at children, the awful books that just basically lie to children. So Transgender Trend has really been so crucial and so central. So I do focus
I think quite a bit on their achievements within that section. But I think one of the real revelations for me has been, in terms of the section on children, has been the extent and scope of the work by so many different groups. I mean, pretty much most. I wasn't aware of all of the groups before I started writing this section, but I was aware of most of them, but probably not in huge detail. So, if we look at the groups that have been set up, there are groups specifically set up by parents to support other parents of children who are confused about whether they're male or female or think they're non-binary or whatever. So there are parent support groups. There are all the different clinical groups, clinical and therapeutic groups, sort of medical, groups of medical practitioners. So there's a whole array of those groups. There are a lot of groups set up to challenge what is happening in schools. And, some of them have websites and are quite, relatively well known in our circles, but some of them are very small, informal local groups that, may not even necessarily have a website or anything like that. And I think those are the main groups. And there's also, this is slightly a different aspect in terms of representing children, but there's a really important and possibly unique group called Children of Transitioners. So they represent a very, very seldom heard voice of children of men who've transitioned in later life, and all the the abuse that they've experienced through being children in those circumstances. I think that's such an important one. But what really struck me when I was kind of trying to get to grips with writing that section and looking at the websites, I have to say I was quite blown away with the extent of the work. So some of the groups that I could mention, groups like Our Duty, the Bayswater support group, some of the others, specifically parents groups. I knew that they existed. I'd met some of the parents at different meetings, parliamentary meetings, other kind of events and actions. But when I saw the websites and saw how much they were doing, even to me, I've been around a long time, and I'd like to think on the whole, I pretty much, I try to keep abreast of what's happening. But the extent of all of this unpaid and often unrecognized labor, it's just incredible. And that was one of the main things that has been a revelation to me, the ways in which parents have supported other parents. It's it's like there's been this kind of like this sort of underground, that whole thing about I can't remember what it's called now, the way that fungi build these I can't remember the name of it now, the name of the networks by which they all communicate underground. I just feel there's so much of that going on in every area, and the one that I'm particularly struck by is the parents. And obviously the parents are going to be, they'll have their own very, very particular sense of urgency and motivation for being involved. So I hope that gives a bit of a flavor. The other thing that I've just been very conscious of as well is how all we can do really is give a sense of the history, and then it has to kind of stop at a certain snapshot in time, because there's like on a weekly basis as we're drafting this, things are happening. It's moving very quickly here, particularly now with with this dreadful proposal for this clinical trial that's going ahead. So I hope that captures something of it for you.
Thanks so much to both of you for that. Yeah, no, that definitely does. And I wanted to just say that as far as I know, and I could be wrong about this, but as far as I know, it was Kelly J. Keane who was initially critical of the CAST report for calling for this clinical trial. And she was one of the first to be on the case. So yeah, okay. I think with that, we're going to lose Julia because she has to go catch a train. So thanks, Julia, for being here today. And with that, we will go to Róisín Michaux, who will talk about her work in writing the chapter from Europe.
Hey everyone, lovely to be here with you all. Can you hear me okay? Cool. Yeah, so couple of months ago. It must have been in the summer when I recorded that video that you just showed. I was actually on a beach in Greece. And so I was in my bikini. I had been asked to write this chapter on Europe. And when I made the video and I talked about what I was going to write about, I said that I was going to write about the difference between the top-down hierarchical imposed AstroTurf type of how trans ideology infected our world versus the contrast with the ordinary women who just sprung up individually like the invention of fire all over the continent. And the more, I mean, it's quite obvious. I don't have to say it. Like there are 27 countries in the EU. There are 48 countries in Europe. So I'm quite limited. So when I hear you, Sally, talking about, and Julia talking about how difficult it is to know what to include and what to exclude, I'll let you just imagine how difficult this task has been. So what I decided to do, and why it's probably this chapter is going to be kind of different from everyone else's chapter, though I just Googled how many countries in Latin America and it said 33. So it's not that different, maybe, perhaps. Latin America is a very different regime, system, landscape, situation, whatever you want to call it. So what I decided to do was, it's about the women who rose up against this, isn't it? It's like I was thinking, should I talk about the Council of Europe and the EU and how we got here and all this stuff? But Cara had sent an email, saying we're going to talk about the resistance. So I keep just thinking to myself, the women, the women, the women, the women. And so I started thinking about like the things that touched me the most about the women who I had met and who I'd come across in this battle. And I have memories that like really stick in my mind of, women who had to pretend to be going out to buy milk, and then would pull over into a lay-by to be able to have a call to talk about their daughters. Or, and then they would maybe drive back home and then have to stay in their driveway and just like duck down. Sometimes you would hear like the indicator of their car. I don't know what you call that in the US, but like the thing that tells you go, or the hazard lights or whatever, you could hear these like car sounds and they're whispering into the phone because they're so afraid of being caught being a TERF, and these were the kind of stories that really struck me. It was these women, it was these stories, it was like the parents, but then also the women who had no skin in the game in the sense that they had no kids who were going through this issue or whatever. No, sorry. My daughter wants to say hello. Can she just come say hello? I'm sorry. She's been asking me all day. Okay, you can come, say hi. Sorry, everybody. Sorry, you can come. They said it's okay. Come.
It's great.
Sorry.
It's
She
great.
just really wants to say hi. I said it's a women's thing and there's going to be like lots of people. Come over quick, say hello quickly. So she's a future TERF, maybe. I don't know. We're going to see. We'll see how it all works out. But she just come and say hi. There you go. She's hiding her face. Hello. Okay, now you can go. Good girl. Sorry about that. So are you happy now? Good girl. So I have so many women that I've met that like their stories either killed me, what they'd been through, or they really moved me. So I decided I'm going to concentrate on that because I can't, like 47, 48 countries. I can't do the whole background. I can't find the Janice Raymonds of all these countries. I know they exist. I can't find, I don't have the language skills. There are like, as I said, there are 27 EU countries alone, which is 23 different languages. So when Cara, when you sent the email to say we're splitting the Australia and New Zealand, I was like, what the fuck? You're splitting Australia and New Zealand and you're leaving me with 48 countries? But so, okay. The fact is that also in Europe, this idea that is called Europe, we have everything from moving west to east. You've got the Nordic countries, the most liberal countries, progressive, quote unquote, in the world, that anything goes. Like Belgium euthanizes children, all the way to Serbia, where like only 6% of people would accept a homosexual living as their neighbor, you know, so it's like the contrasts are huge. So what I decided to do is concentrate on the women who I've met or come across, even if I've only met them online, who either moved me greatly or really their stories upset me greatly. And I think that it's probably in that way it's going to be quite different from everybody else's chapter. I'm kind of limited by the amount of stories there are, you know, and those women that will be that are included in the chapter tend to be the ones from their countries who were the ones who made themselves visible, because they were the ones who moved everything forward. And this is not any shade against women who stay anonymous, because we all know the reasons why people stay anonymous, why women stay anonymous. But there are women who I think you all know in the Netherlands who they are. In France, we have some extremely persecuted women. In Germany, we have some real champs, you know, in Sweden, Norway, you know, there's quite a few women who stuck their heads above the parapet. Again, no shade on anyone who didn't. And I think that concentrating sort of on their stories, and some of them threw themselves into it willingly, and some of them were dragged into it and then decided to stay and fight. And I've met pretty much all of them. And again, it can only be realistically, this is not an academic study on the resistance to transgender ideology. What this is going to have to be, it's going to have to be something that I try to scrape off the top of what's happened and say, and show just sort of the faces and the stories of the real women who actually did put their faces on camera, because that's a huge thing as well, isn't it? Am I right? Like this is horrible, because then you're the face of evil in the country that you're in. And again, further we go east, and this is a controversial thing to say, the more socially conservative European countries are, so the less of a Terven backlash there is. And that's interesting in itself, because you've got like some very good TERFs in Eastern European, Central European countries who are battling two things at the same time, which is traditional conservative, masculinist, macho culture, and then this imposition coming from the West, which is gender, erasure of sex. So as a result of that, in the eastern and the center of Europe, you have far fewer Terven, but there are women there all the same who are saying, this is not right from a leftist perspective again. And even the women who are doing it from a right-wing perspective, I have no problem with that. Somebody was talking in the chat earlier about, are we not going to include Katie Keane? Of course, everyone that I'm going to include in this chapter, I don't particularly care what their politics is. I don't know. We haven't discussed this, Cara. I hope it's okay. But I don't. I'm like, you know, you stood up. And also, what tends to happen, as we all know, is that you'll get into this as a leftist, and then suddenly you find yourself being sort of disoriented, and you don't even know which side you belong to anymore, or whatever. And so, also, those left and right divides mean very little when you go east enough in Europe, you know. So that's what I wanted to say. I'm because of the limitations, I'm concentrating on a few of the absolute warrior TERFs that really stuck their necks out. Again, there will be people left out. There will be I'm particularly scared of the Spanish TERFs, because they are like hardcore rad femmes, and they have been doing work. They've been doing epic work for so long, and I'm afraid that they're gonna maybe feel excluded. So I may not get to all of them in particular, and also German women. You know, they're bravo to the Spanish TERFs, yes, bravo to the German TERFs. Those are the countries I think that have had this most long-standing, well-developed backlash to male supremacism. And you know, here is my pre-apology. Voila. So that's what I'm going to do. So I just want to let you all know that. And voila. I don't know if you have other questions about how I plan to go about this, or other criticisms or whatever. We are going to have some breakouts after.
That's great. That's
Cool.
great. Thank you so much. It sort of reminds me of something that has been the case since the inception of this project, which is that in many ways, it's an absolutely impossible project, right? I mean, it's just impossible to document everything we've done all over the world. And Róisín arguably has the most challenging task because she has so many countries to cover. And I've made it clear from the beginning, it will at some point become my job to incorporate all the chapters and to do some editing. And I don't plan to do very heavy editing at all. Each chapter will necessarily come in a slightly different voice because we're all different women. We all have different experiences. We come from different places. And we'll just talk about this issue differently. And I think Róisín's chapter is going to be amazing. So thank you for that, Róisín. And yes, please do stick around if you can. So now we will turn to Maria and Analía to talk about Latin America.
Okay, hello, here's Analía. I started my presentation, and this is my, the part from Latin America, and you will see what we find about this. I'm talking about the identity agenda in Latin America, breaching institutions and erasing rights. What if international agendas were quietly rewriting Latin America's laws, erasing protections for women under the guise of progress? That's exactly what is happening across the region. Today, I'll cover how this agenda infiltrates systems in major countries like Brazil, Mexico, Colombia, and Argentina, the mechanism at play, and the hidden sponsors driving it all. Let's dive in. First, let me introduce the mechanism and impact of the institutional erosion. This is a process where concepts like gender identity and sexual orientation are embedded into the very foundation of society, usually without much public debate, widely diluting rights based on biological sex. One of the main ways this happens is through top-down constitutional changes, mainly under left-leaning governments. These reforms insert gender identity protections into constitutions, setting the stage for much bigger changes. For instance, as early as 2008 in Ecuador, and then in Bolivia in 2009, new constitution explicitly protected these categories. In Mexico, the 2011 amendment to Article 1 of the Constitution prohibited discrimination based on sexual preferences, which was later interpreted to include gender identity. Even Cuba added the same in 2019. In the region's biggest countries, the pattern is identical. In Brazil, the Supreme Federal Tribunal in 2018 made gender marker changes super easy, just self-ID. And by 2019, it ruled that homophobia and transphobia should be punished like racism. Similarly, in Colombia, in 2015, decree allowed registry changes without medical intervention, paving the way for easier self-ID. It is not only constitutions, strategic litigation, and quiet administrative changes do the same job in Argentina, 2012 self-ID law, Mexico City's 2011 anti-bias rules, and 2015 administrative changes. The capture is evident from what is happening in education and health with subtle infiltrations. In education, for example, Argentina introduced these concepts back in 2006 through the design of its sex ed curriculum, incorporating gender identities, inclusion, and sexual diversities. The spread to Venezuela in 2013. with help from UNFPA. Mexico, starting in 2013, Peru in 2016, and so on and so forth. These programs create public demands. In health, hormone treatments and surgeries arrive years before laws, often by simple ministerial resolutions or court rulings. Brazil and Cuba both starting offering free body modification surgeries in the public health system in 2008. In Argentina, it began alongside HIV prevention, shifting language from women and men to gender identities and incorporating hormone treatments in the public health system. There are some of the changes that aren't isolated. They are a coordinated pattern that normalizes denying biological sex. Recently, Mexico allowed men in women-only spaces in the metro. None of these mechanisms would have advanced so quickly without the decisive collaborations of national counterparts, politicians, judges, ministries, and even feminist and LGBT organizations that enthusiastically embraced and pushed this progressive agenda. These changes were driven by hidden architects, key players using soft power. One sponsor is Soros Foundation with $19.5 million for the Buen Vivir initiative this year to focus on Brazil, Colombia, and Mexico, plus Ford and Arcas funding Colombia Diversa. NGOs are leading too, like Amnesty International in Mexico and ILGA LAC out of Argentina. Rich states also fund this agenda in Latin America, like Canada, with more than $250 million for trans rights. EU's 2025 Inclusive Society Program with Spain, Italy, Germany, and France. And yes, corporations are working in the same direction. Google, Apple, Levi's, backing networks like Open for Business. They run overlapping networks, funding litigation, education, media campaigns, like last year anti-hate speech pushes. But we need to note the present fragility now. 2025 USA decided to cut funds to USAID and ODA, plus right-wing governments like Argentina cutting support, showing this activism is paid and dependent. Across Latin America, it is a lucrative business, co-opting feminist groups and elites, academics, politicians, experts, and their human rights banners, all to breed dependency. The funds flow top-down, reshaping policies in these populous countries. Finally, in Latin America, this agenda erodes institutions through coordinated mechanisms backed by transnational sponsors, ultimately diluting women's rights while normalizing a progressive narrative. Sheer Spanish language accelerates this across borders, but funding cuts reveal its fragility. Changes are coming. We must detect some small shifts before they redefine society. And over to Maria Jose Binetti. Let's hear what she has to add. The floor is yours,
Hello,
Maria.
Analía. Hello, Analía. Thank you. Hello, sisters. I will focus on a very short point from our article, not a general view, but what I consider the most dangerous situation currently now. This is going now. It is the recent agenda in Latin America and the Caribbean. And this agenda has two main topics that for me are the most dangerous at all. It is the agenda of the care as human right and the agenda of hate speech as digital gender violence. This is happening now in Latin America as the last generation agenda in transgenderism. I will be brief describing the situation now. This agenda is basically on UN Women and the Economic Commission for Latin America and the Caribbean, which is a regional commission of the United Nations, one of the 5 commissions that the United Nations has in Latin America. This commission, along with UN Women, organized the 15th Regional Conference on Women in Latin America and the Caribbean. This conference was last year under the banner of the Care Society as a horizon for sustainable recovery with gender equality. This conference concluded with a commitment declaration celebrated in Buenos Aires, and in this commitment declaration, motherhood and mothers don't appear at all. Mother and the social importance of motherhood in the context of here is not appear at all. The same happened with the following conference, Regional Conference on Women in Latin America and the Caribbean, organized by the same commission, along with UN Women and the government of Mexico this year in Tlatelolco. It is an indigenous name in Mexico. This conference is the same, organized under the banner of the Care Society, Governance, Political Economy, and Social Dialogue for a Transformation with Gender Equality. And the Tlatelolco commitment, this transgender uses a lot of indigenous names to seem that they are very indigenous and post-colonial. And this commitment devoted to care, to the Care Society in the political, economical, social, and cultural spheres, but the category of mother and the category of social political function of motherhood are not mentioned at all. However, gender identity, of course, is taken in consideration for this commitment and agenda. There is also a recent advisory opinion from the Inter-American Court of Human Rights devoted to care as a human right, required by Argentina under the advice of UN Women Argentina. So, in this way, Latin American regime managed to turn care into a human right, a global public good, a job capable of boosting the economy as a whole. This human right of care is the right of any person, neutral, gender neutral, to care, be cared, and practice self-care. There is no mention in this agenda of women as mother or the importance of their social function as mothers based on sex. The care paradigm is based on gender and tends to overcome the sexual division of labor. So while expanding the market, care market, the right to care is also expanding the public bureaucracy, the bureaucracy of UN and the bureaucracy of all these agencies around the world. So the purpose of this agenda is to expand the market, expand the bureaucracy, public bureaucracy, because coming a human right, you have to take care of the administrative instances for design and implementation of care policies. So you expand the bureaucracy, you expand the public resources, and women as a mother disappear from everywhere. So it is about erasing mothers and commodifying their function in the markets. So for me, it's the most dangerous situation here now in Latin America. And the second very dangerous agenda, which is currently happening, is hate speech as a digital gender violence. this is emphasizes as well by UN and United Women. UN coined the term digital violence along with the slogan, digital violence is real violence. UN Women in Mexico, along with UN Women in Colombia and Ecuador, launched the campaign Es Real, Es Violencia Digital, I mean, it's real, it is real violence. And they warned that in Latin America, the prevalence of digital violence and deepfakes against women is 91%. So, given this global epidemic, action must be taken. This action is prevent misinformation and disinformation, report hate speech, and support those affected by hate speech. The purpose of this big campaign by UN is to call on governments to take actions and adopt public policies to prevent this hate speech and digital violence. Regarding that, in November now, a week ago or something like that, some days ago, the United Nations General Assembly passed a resolution calling upon all member states to counter disinformation, hate speech, and incitement to gender-based discrimination through internet and social media. In the same vein, the International Women Forum Against Corruption, held in Buenos Aires now some days ago, and sponsored by UN Women, and underlined the need to criminalize hate speech. Along with these institutions, several LGBTQ organizations in Latin America launched the campaign called Nombralo es odio, so name me, it is hate, name it, it is hate, to stop the advance of anti-race and anti-gender discourses in Latin America. And as well in Argentina was introduced a bill in the Congress to criminalize hate speech and acts of discrimination committed by public officials. So, the point is here that for sure it is difficult to draw the line between gender-based hate speech and censorship. That is the point. The censorship is what is going on here on my reading. The criminalization of hate speech seems to be a disguised advancement of social control and censorship of the political debates on global scale. So to ensure diversity and democracy should be censored. This is the reason why Argentina and Paraguay, along with the US, were the only countries that voted against this mentioned UN resolution on disinformation and hate speech, the UN resolution that from some days ago in the General Assembly. Argentina and Paraguay voted against, considering that this resolution violates freedom of thought and expression. So the decision made by Argentina and Paraguay is consistent with the political alignment of both countries, along with another countries is at some point like Peru or El Salvador. And this position contrasts with the alignment of countries like Mexico or Colombia. So at this moment in Latin American political map, the situation is very heterogeneous. We have countries the transgender agenda, and we have countries stopping or restricting the transgender agenda. We will write on that in the chapter devoted to Latin America in TERF's book. That's it by now.
Okay, thank you so much, Maria and Analía. I would like to invite everyone to put questions in the Q&A box. And in the meantime, there is one question for Róisín and one which I believe is for Analía. Analía, I'll ask you first. No, this is for Maria. Sorry, from Sasha. And it's to Maria. Here in California, indigenous cultures, particularly those in Mexico, get used to promote a cultural presence of trans people throughout history. Are there indigenous women fighting back against this in Latin America?
No, honestly, there aren't, because this is a disguised narrative. Actually, indigenous women, I would say that mainly support this agenda, because this transgender agenda is equated with post-colonial and decolonial narrative. But this post-colonial and decolonial narrative are actually postmodern relativism and individualism. So there is a confusion between indigenous or autonomous narratives and postmodern relativism. So this is the confusion. Indigenous communities here follow this postmodern relativist agenda. That is my reading.
Got it. Thank you. There's a question for Róisín. You mentioned Belgium euthanizes children. Why? Can you say more about that?
There have been a couple of cases, yeah, where children have been allowed to be euthanized, I think, based on chronic illness. But it was, yeah, it's the most progressive place in the world. I'm not really able to, I know it's wrong. I know it's wrong in my gut, but I can't really talk about, I don't really know enough about that particular discussion to like comment on it at any length, but I wanted to make the contrast between, as I said, there were 48 different countries that I'm supposed to cover here, and we go all the way from Belgium doing that to countries where, you know, abortion isn't legal. And yeah, it's true though. You can look it up. That's how progressive we are here in Belgium. Just as background, I'm Irish, but I moved to Belgium in 2008 and I've been here ever since. And I've noticed like this huge contrast in Belgium. One of the things that I think has allowed transgender ideology to grow so ferociously in Belgium and the Netherlands and in places like Sweden is because they're very libertarian and it's all about personal freedom. And the interesting contrast is, you know, you can change your gender, pretend you're this sex. You can even decide that your children would be better off being dead than suffering through whatever they're suffering through. But don't tell me what to do. So there's this very interesting contrast, and I hope books will be written about it one day, maybe by me or someone else. But there's this very interesting contrast in these Nordic countries where you have this sort of like anything goes. Everyone's free to do everything you want, but don't step on my toes. And what was interesting about in the Netherlands is I've heard from a couple of people that the sort of the straw that broke the camel's back was when Dutch people started being told you can't say this anymore, you can't say that anymore. That's what kind of broke the spell about trans in the Netherlands, because suddenly it was impeding on other people's right to do and say and feel what they want to do. So I think that's going to be the thing that breaks the spell here ultimately. But yeah, that's how progressive we are. It's like anything goes, you know. Everyone is free to do whatever they want, and that's just the craziest example of where that leads to, is that children can be euthanized. But if you Google it, you'll find these couple of stories. But we had a woman who identified as a man for a few years, killed herself about 10 years ago, and then another one quite recently. And there's a court case now being mounted by her parents who didn't know anything about trans, who are only learning about the ideology now and about how the testosterone might have adversely affected her health, etc. So all these things are just sort of coming to light now in places like Belgium, places very permissive, very progressive. And yeah, it's a very mixed bag all over Europe, but definitely the Netherlands, Sweden, and Belgium, these are the places where you can do almost anything you want. And I think we're seeing the results of that.
So, and there's a follow-up question for you, Róisín, and you may not know the details, but the questions are at what ages and were the children asked what they wanted?
I actually don't remember. I know it was like some chronic illness case. Keep talking and I'll look it up and I'll come back in the breakout maybe.
Okay,
How about
so
that?
that sounds great. So there's conversation in the chat about use of the word left in the definition of TERF as set forward in the video. And so let's have that conversation because we have a little time before we end at past and go into breakouts. And this is a good conversation. And some people are saying that left and right don't mean anything anymore. Fair enough, I get that. So here's my perspective, and I'm happy to receive pushback. I'd love to hear from panelists, and if anybody wants to contribute in chat, that sounds great. If you've got questions, put them in the Q&A. To me, I've sort of got the word left separated into two categories. In my view, there's a set of values and principles that align with the political left. And then on the other side, you've got a set of political parties, organizations, and institutions that are referred to as the left. And a lot of people, a lot of TERFs, have said that they've left the left. And what I generally think they mean by that is that they've left their political parties and their organizations that are considered to be left. I once worked at the ACLU, which in the United States is considered to be left. But I do not think there is anything authentically leftist about trans because I think that I lost my train of thought because Joe was commenting that the RF in TERF stands for radical feminist. It originally did, which of course it does. And the Declaration on Women's Sex-Based Rights is grounded in radical feminist analysis. I don't think there's anything properly leftist about trans because I think it is incredibly sexist, homophobic, fueled by capitalism, and utterly authoritarian. So when people say, and it's definitely the American right that gets away with calling trans the left. And that frustrates me because I just don't think there's anything authentically leftist about trans. But again, in order to make sense of that, I have had to separate left, meaning values and principles, from left, meaning the institutions and organizations and political parties that are traditionally associated with the left. Now, I am very happy to receive feedback on that. Critique, more than welcome. I'd love to hear from other panelists and happy to monitor chat. Well, let me actually say first, before panelists respond, Isadora is saying that only the Democratic Party, I'm losing track of the chat, people, only the Democratic Party supports trans ideology. That is, in fact, not true. So I understand why people think that. And certainly in Congress, it's only the congressional Democrats who support it. But the Republican Party has a Caitlyn Jenner problem. The Republican Party has a Jennifer Pritzker problem. Jennifer Pritzker is a man named James who gives to Republicans all over this country. So it is not true that it's only Democrats who support trans. Okay, what do other panelists think?
When I saw that you had how you I'm going to take the floor. When I saw how you described what a TERF means, I was interested and surprised and not bothered by it. If I'm to apply it to myself personally, that's definitely the case. I not bothered, not I don't know. I actually don't have much of a, it might be what I thought, to be very, very honest. I think it's a lot of it is strategically just to show that we're not the Urbanistas that everyone says that we are. And that's very useful strategically, but I knew that it was going to get on some women's tits to to say it that way. But I'm just like, whatever it takes.
Certainly, there's some strategy going on there. There's chat about the Pritzkers. J.B. Pritzker is the governor of Illinois. He's definitely a Democrat. His cousin James/Jennifer is a massive contributor to Republicans. Do Maria and Analía have anything to add to this conversation about the words that we use to describe ourselves as TERF?
No, I don't. I have just a comment on one question that appeared to me about Tlatelolco, but I can wait for that.
Okay, yes, I see that in the Q&A. Analía, do you have anything to add? If not, that's fine. Okay. Okay. So Maria, why don't you go ahead and address the question about your point? And I'm sorry, I don't even know how to pronounce the word.
No, me neither. It's more difficult to pronounce this than the English for me. Imagine how difficult it is. Tlatelolco. I have a friend, Veronica Pereira Carrillo, who is watching us and sent me the answer about this. Tlatelolco appears frequently in the names of international treaties and political documents because the place carries a unique historical, symbolic, and diplomatic weight in Mexico and Latin America. There are three main reasons: a site with deep historical meaning, a key political landmark of the last century, and a major diplomatic center in Latin America. So this is the meaning of and the scope of Tlatelolco. I'm sorry.
That's okay. I hope that answers the question.
Cara, can I ask, just because I see that this is sort of kicking off in the chat, like this whole discussion, and did you hesitate over the inclusion of that adjective, a leftist feminist, or were you quite sure, and did you understand like the sort of debate that it would kick off?
Sure. Yes, I understood the debate. I think it's very important. I mean, for me personally, and this is not the strategy point, for me personally, I have not abandoned, I've always considered myself to be on the political left, and I've never abandoned any of the values and principles that I hold because of that. And so I am just, and I have reasons for not being willing to vote Republican. So there's a question to that in the chat about suggestion. It says, are you suggesting the definition of political left as classic Enlightenment liberalism? I don't know if that's to me or to anyone else, but I think that my own values would align with classic liberalism. Yes. Do you want to stick with this? Sorry, this is a bit freewheeling. There's another very specific question being addressed to Maria and Analía, or we can stick with this conversation. I'll go with the question to Maria and Analía, which is, what do Mexican feminists think about the recent incident in which the first female Mexican president was groped by a man in public, and might the president be a secret TERF?
I don't know if the president is TERF or no. I just know about the narco state in Mexico, but I don't go into this. But for me, Mexico is a kind of narco state and is coming very, very dangerous and worrying for me the situation in Mexico. I don't know. It's Claudia, for me the president is a kind of puppet of narco. That is my opinion. Maybe I'm not politically correct.
That's okay. Thank you. Sally, do you have any contribution to the conversation about the words that TERFs use to describe ourselves?
I think back not very many years ago, I remember saying to somebody using the word TERF to a friend who hadn't heard it. She said, "Oh, I think I'm a TERF." I said, "Oh no, you don't want to say that because it's like calling somebody a cunt. It's such a rude word. It's used with such vicious, violent, anti-women sentiment." But then, of course, what's happened is we've done what we've always done, and we've just adopted it, and we've reclaimed it, and we've made it our own, and it now doesn't have that power. So I think we refer to ourselves as TERFs. It's not a word probably that we use very much in day-to-day conversation out with maybe the chat groups. As far as the left's concerned, I mean, it is definitely the case here that the left-wing parties, mind you, some of them you would have barely struggled to describe them as left-wing, but anyway, in any meaningful sense of the word, but they are much more inclined to support trans ideology than the right. The Conservatives, well, the thing is that now we say, oh, the Conservatives are the only mainstream party which doesn't embrace transgender ideology. But at the same time, they were in power for, I can't remember, 14 years or 16 years or something. And during that time, they had various opportunities to, for example, change the Equality Act to specify that it meant sex. Sorry, that sex meant biology, just for the avoidance of doubt. Even though it already meant it, but nobody seemed to believe that. Instead of which, they tried to introduce self-ID in England. They did pull back from it for reasons that I'm not terribly clear about, but they did eventually pull back from it, unlike in Scotland, where, the SNP, the Scottish National Party, which is the ruling party in Scotland, the Greens, both in England and Wales and in Scotland, the Liberal Democrats to a great or a lesser extent, the Socialist Workers' Party, not that they're a political party particularly, all support trans rights to a greater or lesser extent. Even whilst the Labour Party claims to accept the Supreme Court ruling now, the Labour government is saying, oh well, nobody can do anything till the guidance from the Equality and Human Rights Commission is published, and then they've got given that 2 months ago, nearly 2.5 months ago, and instead of publishing it, they've said, oh no, we need this, that, and we need some sort of assessment done on it that's going to take another year. So on the one hand, they're saying, we really want to implement the ruling, but we have to wait for the guidance. And on the other hand, they're sitting on the guidance and delaying it for a year. It's completely illogical. Well, actually, it's logical if you think that what they're trying to do is hide from the trans activists within their own party. And I wouldn't be surprised if we don't end up having to have yet another judicial review or take legal action. We seem to have won the court case, but it's not being implemented. And for Women Scotland and Sex Matters particularly are having to go to court time and time and time again, or threaten to go to court on every single issue. And it's just being widely ignored. And we've got all these court cases going on, like the Darlington nurses and the Sandy Peddy nurse case in Scotland, which is absolutely clear since the ruling. They haven't got a hope in hell of winning. And yet they're spending good money fighting those cases at industrial employment tribunals. The Scottish government is about to spend public money going to court to justify its decision, to keep men in women's prisons. So these are all supposedly left-wing parties, but they hate women, I think, is the answer.
So thank you for that. There's also a lot of conversation in the chat about use of the word TERF at all, because it leads with the word trans, and why should we give that any credence? I think that feminists took back this term years ago. I started doing it at the end of 2021, and we don't have to acknowledge that it means that. Like, we can say it means whatever we want to say it means. We can say it means tired of explaining reality to fools. I don't typically curse in public forums, but since everyone else is just throwing around curse words, I'll just say we can just say it means tired of explaining reality to fuckwits, telling everyone real facts, someone's offering up in the chat. So this has been a really valuable discussion. And I do want to get back to Róisín's question, which was, did I think about the strategy behind using the word left in the definition of TERF as used in this book? Now, I don't want to say that the way that this book defines TERF is the definition of TERF. I think that this is an important conversation that has to happen. It has only started to happen in the past couple of years, and it necessarily involves controversy and disagreement, and that's okay. I don't think we should be shying away from that kind of disagreement. I think they're really important conversations. But Róisín's question was, is this in part strategic in order to push back against the narrative that we're the I forget who she used, Orbans of the world. And yeah, that's certainly part of it, right? Because even if many of us feel like the left has abandoned us, or if we feel like we've left our historical parties, for example, those of us who've left the Democratic Party in the US, we feel as though the left has abandoned us over this issue, among others, and that's all totally fine. But probably most of us have not gone like hardcore right-wing authoritarian, counter to what people say about us, right? Like, people say that we've all gone hardcore right-wing, and that's just not true. And part of the strategy with this book, including the title and including the definition, is to illustrate that.
I think, Cara, can I come back on that? I think it's true to say that a lot of us were already on the left and had been involved in political activities of various kinds in ways that would be broadly categorized as left or far left or a little bit left or whatever. But I don't think it's true or accurate to categorize Terven as all on the left, because I'm thinking about, the TERF groups that I'm in, and definitely some of the women in that are definitely on the right. And so I think that one of the things about the Terven is that whilst those of us who had left-wing leanings haven't given them up, I see this as being separate from left and right politics. I mean, the fact of the matter is the left has abandoned us. So the people who support us mostly are the right. And so then they say, oh, you must be right-wing. Whereas actually it's well, no, actually, you must be misogynist is the answer. It's not that we're right-wing. It's you're such misogynists and homophobes that you aren't supporting us, even though we're on the left. But I think that it's inaccurate to define the TERF movement as a leftist movement, even if the majority of people are.
Can I come in there? I think, I have lots of friends who are MAGA TERFs, this type like right-wing TERFs and also quite a lot of people who were never on the left. Some people who became more right-wing as this whole thing went along, and it's kind of a shorthand, isn't it? For one, it's a shorthand for describing a group of women who are fighting back against this. And second point, Cara, it's your project. This is your project. So if somebody else wants to write a book where they say this is what TERF means, then we'll have that discussion also. So when I saw it, I was kind of surprised, and I thought, people are going to be upset by that. But here we are defining terms according to our experiences, our understandings, and here we are. We've all come together to write this book under the tutelage of Cara Dansky, and we are saying, right, we sign up to that. All other discussion about what it means, what the word means to you, can be had. Write a book. And I'm not saying that also to denigrate anyone. As I said, like, half the women that I know that call themselves TERFs in a joking way are Trumpy or MAGA types, or very conservative, or very religious, or even in some cases like homophobic, which is this sort of the weird situation that we found ourselves in. That's it. Let's hash out the meaning of TERF over the years to come as we dismantle this thing, you know? That's how I feel about it. It's like, here's one proposition, come up with more, let's go.
Yeah, that's how I feel about it too. I feel like let's have the conversation. It's a very important conversation to have. The definition of TERF as laid out in this book does not need to be the end all definition. It's a definition I threw out for the purpose of this project. Okay, Joe, do you?
Maybe I can add something. For me, it's very difficult to get into this conversation because left and right became a kind of empty signifiers. It's very confusing because the context are changed and the words are meaning are changed. So I don't consider myself a left in the way maybe you consider you define the left. I don't consider myself either a right person. I'm feminist. So, but taking in mind that these concepts are redefined. So we have to redefine maybe these words. If they are useful, for me, are not useful at all.
Okay, great. That is an excellent contribution, Maria. Thank you. I saw something in the chat that I thought would be good to end on. Let's call ourselves the movement to have people use the word man instead of trans woman. I think we can all agree on that. Okay, so.
WLRN in 3, 2, 1.
I was born.
Hi, I'm Thistle Pedersen, founding member of Women's Liberation Radio News. WLRN handcrafts and co-creates a podcast featuring woman-centered world news, thoughtful interviews, compelling commentary, and women's music, some of it written and performed by our members, like the WLRN theme music you hear beneath my voice. We are volunteers working together to break the sound barrier women are blocked by under the status quo rule of men. As radical feminists, we provide a place for women to hear and discuss the issues of the day in a relaxed and community-building atmosphere. Tune in every first Thursday of the month at WLRNmedia.com.
For my liberation.